I thought I had the perfect life. My boyfriend Jake and I had been together for 2 amazing years, and when my little sister Lily lost her marketing job and needed somewhere to stay, it felt natural to open our home to her. Jake was understanding about the temporary arrangement, and I genuinely believed that having family close would only strengthen our bond. Lily seemed grateful, and those first few days felt like everything was falling into place beautifully. But I never imagined that this act of trust and love would become the biggest mistake of my entire life. Before we dive into this story, let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. Please hit that like button and subscribe because this story will shock you to your core. And trust me, you need to hear how this nightmare unfolded and how justice was finally served. The events I am about to share changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. When Jake first entered my life 3 years ago, I was working as a registered nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, pulling long 12-hour shifts that left me exhausted but fulfilled. He was a software engineer at a tech startup downtown, and we met during one of those rare moments when I actually had time for coffee with mutual friends. There was something immediately genuine about him that drew me in. Jake had this quiet confidence, always listening more than talking, and when he smiled, his entire face would light up in the most authentic way. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally. Jake was the kind of man who remembered small details like how I preferred my coffee, or that I always got nervous before big presentations at work. After 6 months of dating, he started staying over on weekends, and by our first anniversary, he practically lived at my downtown apartment. We had talked about moving in together officially, but with both our leases ending at different times, we decided to wait until the timing made more financial sense. Lily had always been the more dramatic one in our family. 3 years younger than me, she had bounced between different jobs since college, never quite finding her footing in the professional world. When she called me crying that Tuesday evening in March explaining that her marketing firm had laid off half their staff and she could not afford rent anymore, my heart immediately went out to her. Our parents lived in a tiny retirement community in Florida, and there was no space for her there. My apartment was a decent size for downtown living. It had 2 bedrooms, and I had been using the second one as a home office. Jake and I quickly moved my desk into the living room corner to make space for Lily. The layout worked perfectly for our situation. The guest room had its own bathroom, so privacy would not be an issue, and Jake could continue staying over without anyone feeling uncomfortable. Those first 2 weeks were actually wonderful. Lily seemed genuinely grateful for the help, constantly thanking me and making efforts to contribute. She took over most of the cooking, which was a blessing since my nursing schedule left me exhausted most evenings. Jake appreciated her efforts too often, complimenting her homemade lasagna or the way she kept the apartment spotless. It felt like we were becoming a real family unit. Jake had always been helpful around the house, but with Lily there, he stepped up even more. When she mentioned that the guest room closet door was sticking, he spent an entire Saturday afternoon fixing it properly. When her laptop started acting up, he troubleshot the software issues without being asked. I felt proud watching them get along so well, thinking about how lucky I was to have found a man who treated my family with such kindness. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to shift. It started with small changes that I initially dismissed as Lily just getting comfortable in our space. She began staying up later, often still awake when Jake came to bed with me. She would emerge from her room in increasingly casual clothing when she knew he was around, claiming she was just grabbing water or checking if we needed anything from the store. I remember the exact moment I first felt that uncomfortable twist in my stomach. It was a Thursday evening after I had worked a particularly brutal shift in the emergency room. Jake was in the living room watching television, and Lily came out of her room wearing a tank top and shorts that seemed much more revealing than necessary for just hanging around the apartment. She lingered by the couch asking Jake about his day and making comments about the show he was watching. Something about her body language felt different, more deliberate somehow. When I mentioned it to Jake later that night, he gave me this look I had never seen before. It was not anger exactly, but more like relief that I had noticed something too. He told me he had been feeling slightly uncomfortable, but could not put his finger on why. He said Lily had been asking him personal questions about our relationship things, like whether we planned to get married soon, and how we handled disagreements. At the time, I defended her, explaining that she was probably just trying to understand what a healthy relationship looked like since her own dating history had been pretty rocky. That conversation created the first real tension between Jake and me since Lily had moved in. He felt like I was not taking his concerns seriously, and I felt like he was being unfairly critical of my sister during a vulnerable time in her life. We ended up going to bed without really resolving anything, both of us lying awake in the darkness with our own thoughts. The incident started becoming more frequent and harder to ignore. The following Tuesday, Jake came home from work to find Lily emerging from the bathroom wearing only a towel, claiming she had not heard him come in. She seemed flustered and apologetic, but Jake later told me something about her reaction felt performative rather than genuinely embarrassed. When I asked her about it, she laughed it off, saying she had been listening to music with headphones and genuinely had not heard the front door. A week later, I came home early from a shift that had been cut short due to low patient volume, and I found Lily in my bedroom. She was sitting on my bed, supposedly looking for a phone charger, but Jake was in the living room and could have easily gotten one for her. When I asked why she had not just asked him, she gave me this strange smile and said she had not wanted to bother him while he was working on his laptop. Something about the explanation felt rehearsed. The cooking situation escalated too. Lily began preparing elaborate meals specifically tailored to Jake's preferences, dishes I had mentioned he enjoyed in passing conversations months earlier. She would spend hours in the kitchen creating these restaurant-quality presentations, then hover around while he ate, asking for detailed feedback and suggestions for improvement. It felt like she was auditioning for something, and the realization made my skin crawl. Jake started working later at the office, and when he was home, he made sure never to be alone in common areas when I was not there. If I was working and he needed something from the kitchen, he would text me first to check if Lily was around. This dance of avoidance was putting stress on everyone, but whenever I tried to address it directly with Lily, she would turn the conversation around, suggesting that maybe Jake was feeling guilty about something and projecting those feelings onto her innocent behavior. The massage incident was the turning point that should have been my wake-up call. I was in the shower after a particularly demanding shift, and when I came out, I found Lily offering to give Jake a shoulder massage, claiming she could see how tense he looked from his long day at work. Jake was sitting rigidly on the edge of the couch, clearly uncomfortable, politely declining her offer. But Lily persisted, moving closer and reaching toward his shoulders despite his obvious reluctance. When I intervened, asking what was going on, Lily immediately became defensive, saying she was just trying to be helpful and that Jake seemed stressed. She accused me of being suspicious and paranoid, suggesting that maybe the stress from my demanding job was making me see problems that did not exist. Jake remained quiet during this exchange, but I could see the frustration building in his eyes. That night, Jake and I had our most serious conversation about the situation. He told me he felt like he was walking on eggshells in what should have been a comfortable space. He was tired of constantly monitoring his behavior and movements to avoid any situation that might be misinterpreted. More concerning, he was starting to feel like Lily was deliberately creating these awkward scenarios. The breaking point came when Jake gave me an ultimatum I never thought I would hear from him. He said he loved me deeply, but he could not continue living in an environment where he felt uncomfortable and potentially unsafe from false accusations. He asked me to choose: either Lily needed to find alternative living arrangements, or he would need to step back from our relationship until she was no longer staying with us. This demand shattered something inside me. I felt torn between loyalty to my sister, who was struggling and needed support, and protecting the relationship that meant everything to me. Jake had never asked me to choose between him and anyone before, and the fact that he felt desperate enough to make such a request told me the situation had become untenable. I spent sleepless nights trying to figure out how to handle the situation fairly. Part of me felt guilty for even considering asking Lily to leave when she was in such a vulnerable financial position. But another part of me recognized that Jake's concerns were valid and that ignoring them might cost me the most important relationship in my life. The night that changed everything started like any other, but it would end with my entire world exploding into pieces I did not know how to put back together. I was working a late shift at the hospital covering for a colleague who had called in sick with the flu. It was supposed to be a routine evening in the cardiac unit monitoring post-surgery patients and managing medication schedules. Around 10:30 p.m., my phone buzzed with a call from Mrs. Rodriguez, our elderly neighbor who lived in the apartment directly above ours. Her voice was shaking as she explained that she could hear shouting and what sounded like someone screaming for help coming from our unit. She said it had been going on for about 10 minutes, and she was worried enough to call the police if she could not reach me. My blood turned to ice as I listened to her words. I immediately told my supervisor I had a family emergency and rushed out of the hospital, my hands trembling as I tried to drive safely while my mind raced with worst-case scenarios. The 20-minute drive home felt like hours, and every possible explanation running through my head was more terrifying than the last. When I reached our building, I could see police cars in the parking lot, their red and blue lights reflecting off the surrounding buildings in an ominous display. My stomach dropped as I realized Mrs. Rodriguez had followed through on her threat to call for help. I ran up the stairs two at a time, my nursing shoes echoing loudly in the stairwell. The scene I walked into was unlike anything I could have prepared myself for. Jake was sitting on our couch, his shirt wrinkled and his hair disheveled, looking completely shell-shocked. Two police officers were standing nearby taking notes while a third was speaking quietly with Lily in the corner by the kitchen. My sister was crying dramatically, wrapped in a blanket, her makeup smeared and her breathing erratic. The female officer approached me immediately, explaining that they had responded to a domestic disturbance call and were investigating an alleged sexual assault. My legs nearly gave out beneath me as she continued speaking her words, hitting me like physical blows. According to their preliminary information, there had been an incident between the two people in my apartment, and they needed to gather statements from everyone involved. Lily's version of events was delivered through tears and hyperventilation that seemed almost theatrical in its intensity. She claimed that Jake had forced himself on her while she was changing clothes, and when she resisted and threatened to tell me, he had tried to cover up his actions by claiming she had deliberately exposed herself to him. Her story included details about how he had cornered her in her room and how she had to fight him off screaming for help until the neighbors called the police. Jake's account was completely different and delivered with a shell-shocked clarity that spoke to his genuine trauma over the false accusations. He explained that he had been working on his laptop in the living room when Lily emerged from her room wearing very little clothing and began making explicit advances toward him. When he firmly rejected her and tried to leave the area, she became angry and started screaming accusations at him, threatening to destroy his reputation and our relationship if he did not comply with her demands. Standing there listening to these two completely contradictory stories, I felt like I was drowning in quicksand. These were the two people I trusted most in the world, and one of them was lying so convincingly that even I could not immediately tell who was telling the truth. The police officers were professional, but clearly taking the allegations seriously, and I could see them watching Jake with the kind of suspicion that comes with these types of accusations. The investigation process was thorough and humiliating for everyone involved. They collected physical evidence, took photographs, and conducted separate interviews with each person present. Jake submitted to questioning without a lawyer, insisting that he had nothing to hide and that the truth would vindicate him. Lily continued her dramatic performance, providing increasingly detailed accounts of the alleged assault. But then the truth began to emerge through evidence that Lily had not anticipated. Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned that she had recently installed a security camera in the hallway outside her door because of package theft issues in the building. The footage from that camera showed Jake leaving our apartment in a clearly distressed state, 20 minutes before Lily's screaming began contradicting her timeline of events completely. More damning evidence came when the police asked to examine Lily's phone as part of their investigation. Initially, she claimed it was broken and unusable, but when they insisted, text messages revealed conversations with friends where she had been discussing her attraction to Jake and her frustration with his rejection of her advances. There were even messages from earlier that week, where she had joked about finding ways to break up Jake and me, so she could have him for herself. The final piece of evidence that shattered Lily's fabricated story came from her own attempt to be clever. In trying to build credibility for her accusations, she had recorded part of her encounter with Jake on her phone, intending to edit the footage to support her version of events. However, the complete recording actually captured her making unwanted advances, Jake's clear rejections and attempts to leave the situation, and her angry threats when he would not comply with her demands. When confronted with the irrefutable evidence of her lies and manipulation, Lily's entire facade crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. The dramatic tears stopped, the hyperventilating ceased, and for the first time in weeks, I saw my sister's true face. It was cold, calculating, and completely unrecognizable from the person I thought I knew and loved. The confrontation that followed was raw and brutal in its honesty. I demanded that she explain herself not to the police or to Jake, but to me as her sister, who had trusted her completely and opened my home to her when she needed help most. Her confession came in pieces, each revelation more devastating than the last. Lily admitted that she had been attracted to Jake from the moment she moved in and had spent weeks planning ways to seduce him away from me. She had been deliberately creating compromising situations, testing his boundaries, and trying to find weaknesses she could exploit. When all her subtle attempts failed, she had decided that if she could not have him willingly, she would destroy our relationship by making him seem like a predator. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound I had ever experienced in my years as a nurse. This was not just about wanting my boyfriend. This was about being willing to destroy an innocent man's life and reputation to get what she wanted. She had been prepared to let Jake face criminal charges, lose his job, and carry the stigma of sexual assault allegations for the rest of his life, all for her own selfish desires. My emotional response was immediate and volcanic. Years of suppressed frustration, betrayal, and protective fury erupted in a way I had never experienced before. I lunged toward her, screaming about how she had tried to destroy the man I loved, and how she had violated every trust between us as sisters. The physical altercation was brief, but intense, with me pushing and shoving her, while she stumbled backward trying to get away from my rage. Lily fell hard against the corner of the kitchen counter, striking her head and shoulder in a way that required immediate medical attention. The same police officers who had come to investigate her false allegations now had to call an ambulance to treat her injuries. There was a bitter irony in watching the paramedics treat wounds that were the direct result of her own lies and manipulation. The legal consequences that followed were swift and comprehensive. The district attorney's office took Lily's false accusations very seriously, especially given the evidence of premeditation and the potential harm to Jake's life and career. She was charged with filing a false police report, attempted extortion, and sexual assault based on her unwanted advances toward Jake, despite his clear refusal. The court proceedings revealed the full extent of Lily's calculated deception. Security footage, phone records, and witness testimony painted a picture of someone who had systematically planned to destroy an innocent person's life for her own gratification. The judge was particularly harsh in his sentencing, noting that false accusations not only harm the immediate victims, but also make it harder for real assault survivors to be believed and supported. Lily was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, required to pay restitution for Jake's legal fees and emotional distress, and was placed on the sex offender registry due to the nature of her assault against Jake. The registry listing would follow her for years, affecting her employment opportunities, housing options, and social relationships in ways that reflected the seriousness of her crimes. The healing process for Jake and me was long and difficult, requiring months of couples counseling to rebuild the trust that had been shattered by my sister's betrayal. We had to learn how to navigate conversations about family loyalty versus protecting innocent people, and Jake had to work through the trauma of being falsely accused of such a serious crime. Some days were harder than others, but our love proved stronger than the damage Lily had tried to inflict. I had to set firm boundaries with family members who initially sided with Lily or suggested that I should forgive her because she was family. Those conversations were painful, but necessary, helping me understand that real love sometimes means holding people accountable for their actions rather than enabling destructive behavior. Today, 2 years later, Jake and I are stronger than ever. We got engaged 6 months ago, and our relationship has a foundation of honesty and communication that was forged through surviving this nightmare together. We learned that trust is not just about believing the best in people, but also about being willing to face difficult truths when evidence contradicts our hopes. The experience taught me that family loyalty cannot come at the expense of justice and truth. Sometimes protecting the people you love most means standing up to the people you thought you loved, even when it breaks your heart. I learned to recognize manipulation tactics and to trust evidence over emotions when making important decisions about people's character and intentions. Jake and I still live in the same apartment, but we have new locks, a security system, and a much clearer understanding of our boundaries with others. We have built a life based on mutual respect, honest communication, and the knowledge that we can weather any storm as long as we face it together with truth and integrity guiding our decisions. I want to leave you with this thought. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we invite into our most vulnerable spaces, and sometimes justice requires us to choose truth over comfort, even when that truth destroys relationships we thought would last forever. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting someone you loved from harm? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you or someone you know, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about love, betrayal, and finding the strength to fight for what is right. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that justice is possible, even in the darkest situations. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how deeply people try to bury it with lies.